Hello, everyone. I'm Beth Jarris, Vice President of the Association of Public Data Users. I want to welcome you to this rapid response data briefing on the 2026 Census Test, co-hosted by Data Index, the Association of Public Data Users, Population Reference Bureau, the Census Project, the Leadership Conference Education Fund, and Fair Count. Given the pace of changes in data across the federal government, we've created this briefing series to raise awareness about potential risks to public data and, most importantly, how you can take action. We'll be sharing some specific actions today, and after the webinar, we'll follow up by email with the recording, slides, and any links shared. We have just 30 minutes together today, but if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A box. We'll answer as many as we can in text, and if we have time left at the end after our panelists speak, we'll try to answer a question or two. If we don't have time, we'll include as many answers as we can in our follow-up email. I feel like I say this every time, but it's because it's true. Today we have an all-star panel. Each of our panelists hold multiple distinguished roles, but since we have just 30 minutes, I'm going to highlight just one for each of them. Dr. Rachel Cortes is Chief Demographer at Claritas. Mary Jo Mitchell is Co-Director of the Census Project. Meeta Anand is Senior Director of Census and Data Equity at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And Dr. Jeanine Abrams McLean is President of Fair Count. And last but not least, Meghan Maury is former Senior Advisor to the Director of the Census Bureau and a frequent participant on these panels. And together, they'll walk us through the highlights of what's in the 2026 Census Test, why it's important, the risks it's facing, and how you can support this essential step toward the 2030 census. So Rachel, I'm going to start with you. Knowing how important high-quality demographic data are to your work, I know you're tracking preparation for the 2030 census closely. Can you give us an overview of what's in the 2026 Census Test?
Sure, thank you so much, Beth. So what is a census operational test? Basically, it's a large-scale simulation of census operations that are designed to evaluate procedures, systems, and workflows under realistic conditions. So my role in this webinar is to tell you what a census operational test is, but I'm going to start by telling you what it's not. It's not a content test. So this is not where we focus on questionnaire wording or survey questions. Instead, it evaluates how census operations function as a system, how the infrastructure, field activities, technology, and coordination mechanisms are going to work together. It's also not a full census. It's a structured test of selected operational areas where new or improved approaches are considered for the upcoming decennial census. The emphasis is on observing how these components will perform in practice under conditions that will resemble actual implementation. Starting with what it covers. First, self-response operations. These are the systems and processes that allow people to respond on their own to the census, whether that's online or through paper instruments. Second, in-field enumeration. This is the operational structure that's used to collect data in person from housing units when households don't reply on their own. Third, group quarters enumeration. This is the approach used to count people living in managed or collective living arrangements, such as college housing, prisons, assisted living facilities. Group quarters units require special procedures that are different from those that housing units use to enumerate the population. Fourth, communication, partnership, and engagement. This includes outreach efforts that work with community organizations and trusted messengers to inform the public and encourage participation, including targeted engagement strategies. Fifth, integrated near real-time response processing. And this is just the integration of data collection and processing so that we could review and assess data during the enumeration period rather than only after the collection's concluded. And importantly, across several of these areas, an operations test would include enhancements intended to address historically undercounted and hard-to-count populations. But that focus is embedded within multiple operational components and not treated as a standalone activity. All these areas would work together with the same goal of the decennial census, which is always to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. So turning to how this would work, the test focuses on new and improved approaches. Areas involving meaningful changes are included in scope, and the aim of the operational test is to see how these proposed changes work in the real world under decennial-like conditions. It assesses whether proposed changes can be implemented under realistic conditions using the available systems, the staffing models, and the infrastructure, and whether they all function together when you deploy them together. It combines key functions into a single test environment. So that just means instead of touching each thing independently, it would evaluate how these interact in a unified framework. And importantly, as I mentioned, it's only conducted in selected sites, not the whole country. And these sites are chosen in advance based on a defined criteria to ensure the population and areas included reflect the nation as a whole, such as including areas in both rural and metro areas and in tribal lands. And as a part of the stage development process, an operational test would precede a broader dress rehearsal that comes later in the decade, when the full operational design will be brought together before 2030. So in short, an operational test is a practice trial run of key parts of the census. It doesn't test survey questions or wording, but it tests how new and updated procedures would work when they're carried out together in a real-world setting. So that's it for me. I'll hand it back to Beth. And next slide.
Thank you, Rachel. Now, Mary Jo, you're the first person I turn to when I have questions about what's going on with the decennial census. Can you tell us why the 2026 census test is so important?
Thanks, Beth. Well, I believe I can. In some, I think that the quote right here says it all. And I believe many of you have either read this statement before or heard it before, but it does bear repeating, I believe. The decennial census is the largest civilian peacetime operation that the federal government conducts. As you know, its outcome dictates congressional apportionment, and it also informs the allocation of over $2 trillion annually in federal funding. So obviously, an undertaking of this magnitude is very consequential, and it must be done methodically and with carefully designed preparations to ensure a successful outcome. As this graph of the 2030 census planning timeline illustrates, preparations for the next decennial actually began prior to the conduct of the 2020 census. Next slide. Now, it's worth noting that the cadence and details of mid-decade tests that the Census Bureau designs and conducts vary in order to meet the unique needs of each decennial census cycle. However, the overarching goals really don't change. The Bureau conducts them to not only improve the accuracy, ultimately, of the decennial headcount, but also to reduce the need for unplanned additional funding, particularly in the peak years at the end of the decade. Planning for the 2026 census test was part of the earliest deliberations when they began talking about plans for the 2030 census. Census Bureau officials were eager to know early on, they knew early on they wanted to conduct a robust test in 2026 to evaluate new enumeration methodologies and technologies with an eye towards improving the accuracy of the count, especially for hard to count populations. And it was the location of the test sites that they chose that they believe was really going to be key in part to its outcome. They chose 6 geographically and demographically diverse sites, and they included regions that in some cases were still recovering from a natural disaster. They also included tribal and rural areas, an area that included a military installation, as well as one that had a correctional facility. Next slide. We know from the ramp up to the 2020 census that curtailing tests has adverse consequences. In the last decade, largely due to funding shortfalls and budget uncertainties, the Census Bureau canceled 2 of its 3 field tests and ultimately conducted only an end-to-end test in one site in Providence, Rhode Island. Census stakeholders, and you're going to hear this again from other speakers, attribute in part the high undercount of Latinos, Native Americans on reservations, Black communities, and young children in the 2020 census to the cancellation of the field tests that would have occurred in other carefully chosen areas of the country. The prospect of the Bureau canceling sites as part of the 2026 census test is why census stakeholders fear history may be repeating itself. Back to you, Beth.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Meeta, I'm going to bring you up next. I know you're a staunch advocate for fair and accurate census. And based on your assessment, what are the risks that we're looking at?
Well, thanks so very much, Beth, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I have a few points to cover and not much time to cover it in, so let's see if I make it. So we had both Rachel and Mary Jo highlight 2 basically the same important points, which are that these tests provide that opportunity to, quote Rachel, to find enhancements to address historically undercounted or hard to count populations, or as Mary Jo said, a chance to improve the accuracy of counting hard to count populations. So what are we talking about here? When Beth said that I'm a fierce advocate for a fair and accurate census, we know that the 2020 census had Overall, when you count everyone, net undercount, it had neither an undercount nor an overcount in any statistical way. It estimated that there was a net undercount of 0.24%. But that's when they sort of, took overcounts and undercounts and mashed them together. But when we start to disaggregate the data and look at specific subpopulations, we find out that the accuracy is not uniform. So in 2020, Black alone or in combination were undercounted at 3.3%, and Hispanic or Latino at 4.99%. And American Indian or Alaska Native alone or in combination living on reservations had an undercount rate of 5.64%. We also know that young children are undercounted. We know that renters are undercounted. We know that people who live in rural areas are undercounted. People without internet access are undercounted. So if you want to have a better census, a more fair, a more accurate census, the emphasis should be on looking at how to improve the count of those populations. So turning to what we have at hand here. The Census Bureau made an announcement in 2025 as to what would be included in the 2026 operational test. What we have put together on this slide here shows you what was in the announcement and what we have now. So I'm going to focus on a few things here. One is languages. The languages on the internet self-response in the initial test were supposed to include English, Spanish, and Chinese, and now they include English only. Dr. Jeanine Abrams McLean, who will be speaking after me, will be talking about how we've gone from 6 to 2 sites. But I can tell you that even though neither Huntsville, Alabama, nor Spartanburg, South Carolina are very diverse, they still have each over 9,000 adult Spanish speakers who are American citizens and over 9,000 speakers of other Indo-European, Asian, or other languages. And this is what it means to count everyone. We have to make sure we're grabbing everyone, even if it's a smaller percentage, that absolute number matters. Next, the questionnaire format. As Rachel told us, we should be looking at operational enhancements, not a change in the test, not a change in content. In fact, to do this properly, we should just be using the decennial census questionnaire so that we understand that any changes that happen are a result of the changes in operational enhancements. So what was the questionnaire format supposed to be? The Census 2020 format. What is the format now proposed? A reordered ACS form, including the citizenship question. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the ACS, that's the American Community Survey, which is a substantially longer test than the decennial census, a longer questionnaire than the decennial census form. So that creates problems in terms of evaluating why you would see any change in response rate. We're not trying to look for a new questionnaire. We just want to see the changes in operations. What else do we see going on? Well, we were supposed to see mobile questionnaire assistance, which is basically providing that pop-up on-the-ground assistance for people who are looking to understand why they're taking the census. Also check in on message testing, which is really important when trying to reach those historically and persistently undercounted populations. Now, if we go to the next slide, we will see something else. USPS enumerators. Something else being tested on this test, proposed to be tested, is the use of U.S. Postal Service employees as enumerators. Now, I have actually been to parties where people have heard this and say, well, it sounds great to me. It sounds efficient. But here's the thing. It isn't. Firstly, in 2011, the government, the GAO, did a study and to examine, are there efficiencies to be found by using postal workers this way? And they found that it wasn't, mostly because of cost escalation. Postal workers earn more money than Census Bureau enumerators. So you don't save money by using postal workers. In planning for the 2020 census, the Census Bureau again evaluated whether or not this was possible and considered piloting the program. And in so doing, they recognized that there is a conflict between the confidentiality provisions of Title 13 that Census Bureau employees are sworn to, the enumerators are sworn to, and Title 39 of the Post Office, where they cooperate with law enforcement. So we would need to know, in what way are we seeing this conflict resolved in such a way that postal workers can be used as enumerators. Finally, it's also about the quality of enumeration. Are postal workers going to be rushing through this work, or understanding the importance of how to ask the questions and the way to ask the questions? So we have deep concerns that this effort is going to undermine the census. We don't know why they're seeking to test this when we already know that it's problematic. So with that, I'm going to leave this here for you to see the 2 sites that are left. And Beth, I bet you're taking it over to Jeanine now.
I am, thank you. And Meeta, even if I think I know everything about the problems, invariably you bring up something that is news to me. So thank you for that. And then last but certainly not least on the risks, Jeanine, I'd like to invite you up. I know you are passionate about eliminating historical undercounts in the census, and Meeta shared some risks, but I know there are more. Can you tell us about the risks that you are seeing?
100%, definitely, Beth. Hi, everyone. So as you heard, originally there were 6 locations across the country that were planned for the 2026 census test. Now only 2 remain: Huntsville, Alabama, and Spartanburg, South Carolina. Now, as a person from the South, it is true that the South deserves focused attention, given that 5 of the 6 states with significant undercounts in the 2020 census were in the South. However, limiting testing to just 2 mid-sized southern cities that are not rural does not adequately test vulnerable communities in the South, and definitely not across the nation. So with the planned test sites, we are losing the critically important ability to test in the kinds of environments where persistent undercounts are most likely to happen. We are losing the opportunity to test in rural areas with historically low self-response rates, in tribal areas, and in communities with non-mailable addresses, meaning places where traditional mail-based outreach simply doesn't work. So if you're thinking, how is that going to work with USPS enumerators? You're not alone. If these environments are not included in operational testing, we are not stress testing the systems that must work in 2030. For instance, rural communities across the country often have lower self-response rates and require more intensive follow-up. Some of these areas rely heavily on in-person enumeration because mail delivery is inconsistent, or because addresses are incomplete or unconventional. Without testing these specific conditions, we won't know whether staffing models, partnership strategies, or address verification processes are actually sufficient. Regarding tribal areas, as Meeta mentioned, in the 2020 census, Native Americans living on reservations experienced one of the highest net undercount rates of any group in the country. Many tribal communities face unique logistical hurdles: non-traditional housing structures, homes without standardized street addresses, limited broadband access, and large geographic distances between households. These are not issues that can be fully estimated or simulated in a mid-sized city. Another major gap in the current testing plan is the limited clarity around how or whether group quarters operations will be fully tested. As you heard, group quarters include places like nursing homes, college dormitories, correctional facilities, military barracks, group homes. These populations are not counted in the same way as households, and they require specialized operations, coordination with administrators, tailored outreach strategies, and careful procedural planning. What makes this even more striking is that both Spartanburg and Huntsville were specifically identified as locations with a wide range of group quarters types. And yet, the current plans do not clearly outline the testing of group quarters operations at these sites. In my opinion, it's mind-boggling. If you deliberately selected locations with diverse group quarters environments, but don't test the systems required to count those populations, you're leaving one of the most operationally complex components of the census insufficiently examined. And lastly, I think it's important to note that all of this that you've heard today is happening at a time where another safeguard has been weakened. The Census Bureau's advisory committees, including the 2030 Census Advisory Committee, have been eliminated. These committees historically provided independent expertise, stakeholder input, and public-facing accountability. They brought together demographers, local leaders, advocates, and data experts to flag emerging concerns and to push for stronger planning. Their absence severely limits our ability to hold the Census Bureau accountable in real time and at this crucial moment. Without these advisory structures, there are fewer formal mechanisms for raising red flags, fewer independent voices embedded in the process, and fewer structured opportunities to course correct, making rigorous and inclusive operational testing even more critical. In past decades, advisory committees helped surface issues around historically undercounted populations, language access, rural operations, and group quarters procedures, many of the very challenges that contributed to undercounts in 2020 and that we are facing heading into 2030. So, when external oversight diminishes, internal testing must become stronger. It should not be weakened. So it's important that we make our voices heard now. And with that, I will turn it back over to Beth.
Thank you, Jeanine. And that is a perfect segue into our final piece, which is how you can take action. So Meghan, people who've listened before know this, but for those of you who are new, you are the person I turn to when I need guidance on data advocacy. So can you share what people can do to support this essential step toward the 2030 census?
I sure can. So anytime the federal government's making changes to an information collection, they ask you all for input, and we'd love if you took this chance to give them some input. I will say globally, any input that you provide is valuable input. Whether you have capacity to submit a really long comment that addresses all of the issues that Meeta, Jeanine, and others have raised today, or you just want to send a one-paragraph comment saying, I oppose these changes and here is why. All of that is valuable input to the Census Bureau so they can really get a sense of what the public feels about the changes that they're making. Practically, all you need to do to comment on this is to click on the Federal Register notice, which Beth has put into the chat. Right at the top, you'll see an item that says submit a public comment. You click on that, you'll see a comment field. You type right in there and you can submit. You can also upload a document there if you prefer to upload a longer Word document or other kind of public comment. If your capacity is a little bit lower and you can't comment on your own, on the next slide, you'll see quite a few folks are producing sign-on comments for our colleagues. These sign-on comments on the next slide are mostly accepting organizational sign-ons. So if you work for an organization that wants to sign on to one of these comments, again, links are in the chat, and you're more than welcome to sign on to those. You can also take a look at these sign-on comments and use some of the comment in your own personal comment to the Census Bureau if you prefer to cobble together something of your own, but want a little bit of help getting started. Let's say you want to submit a comment, but you feel like you just need a little bit more information. On the next slide, you'll see that there's an upcoming virtual briefing on changes to and implications for the 2030 census. That's on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday from 4 to 5 p.m. And you're very welcome to join that virtual briefing. And of course, if you'd like to just keep up with all of these opportunities to public comment, on Data Index, we track all of these changes that are being made to information collections. Please sign up and take a look. Or on the next slide, you can join us at Federal Data Forum, where you'll find lots of nerds like us discussing what's going on in the world of data. Beth, back to you.
Thank you, Meghan. I want to just thank all of our panelists. That was fantastic and a ton of information in a very short period of time. There have been a couple of questions that have come in. We have maybe 2 minutes, so we'll take one or two of them. And one, Meghan, you kind of addressed this, but if you could be a little more specific. One of the questions is, are there some templates floating around? Are there any opinions on using those as starters or in full? And you touched on this a little bit, but you want to expand on that a tiny bit?
Again, any comment is a good comment, and signing on to a template comment is great. It shows the Census Bureau that there's consensus around a set of opinions, and that's helpful to them to know that lots of folks are thinking the same thing. That said, the Census Bureau and other federal agencies think about each individual comment, even if there's a lot of signatories, as a single comment. So there's also value in having a lot of variety of comments. And if you do use one of those as sort of a template to get you started, do your best to say it in your own words so that Census knows that you are thinking this through and have an opinion of your own.
Thank you. One question came in that I will attempt to tackle, and it's internet browsers have built-in translation abilities. Is there a reason why it wouldn't just, sort of people couldn't just translate on their own? And as a survey person, I would say different translations will be slightly different in their interpretation. And so to get an accurate set of data for all of the population, we want to ask the question in exactly the same way for every person rather than having translation kind of on the fly, which is why in a perfect world, you would have a Spanish form and a Chinese form and sort of translation services available in other languages in the census itself. So that's the reason why we want it to be in the form tested on the ground as opposed to having a translator service use it. And there's one more question that came in. Should people contact their member of Congress? Mary Jo, do you want to tackle that one?
Thanks for the question. I think sort of echoing what Meghan said, I think the more noise we can make about these changes and our concerns, the better. I think congressional offices are not aware always of the decennial cycle, the planning cycle, and why these points in time are so critical to a successful outcome. They sort of focus on the end game and aren't really always clued in to why these building blocks are so critical to the outcome of a successful decennial headcount. So you can take the letters, the sign-on letters, and use those as the basis for outreach to your own members of Congress and asking them to contact the Census Bureau and Department of Commerce to express their concerns, passing along your concerns about these really dramatic changes to the 2026 census test and what it means for accuracy and cost efficiency down the road.
And we've got we got through a lot of questions actually. So there is a question that's come in, and then we've had a couple of variations on this. Why Spartansburg and Huntsville why were they chosen, or any sort of speculation on the reasons? Do any of our panelists want to, have we heard anything about why those spots were chosen? I'm not seeing anyone jump off of mute, so maybe we don't have an answer for that. Meeta.
Well, we don't have an answer per se, but I will answer sort of the generic, like, why is this happening question. And I will say that we haven't had that much insight. From what we've heard, there is a huge desire to test postal workers as enumerators. So that drove a lot of this. And also that the Census Bureau has not said anything other than the purposes of the test have not changed. So I'm just saying, I don't want to speculate on these things. I think it would be interesting for people to take a look at the demographic variance across areas. Jeanine referred to it vaguely, but I would say that we do not see the demographic diversity in the two areas that were selected that truly reflect the diversity of our country, or even reflect the diversity of who is and is not a citizen. I am not saying that that drove it, but I am saying it is worth looking at the variance to really understand the perniciousness of dropping from 6 sites to 2.
Thank you. And that's a great place to end. I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. I want to thank all of you who are in attendance for caring about public data. And as a reminder, in case you've missed any of the links that we shared, we will be sharing slides, the list of actions, and the webinar recording, and any links that were shared during the presentation. Now go submit those comments. Thank you so much.